Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to the Eternal Spoiler Breakdown. My name is M, and we are looking at the new draft cards. The draft spoiler event has been released, so these cards will be filtering into draft, and we're going to be seeing a bunch of new unleashed commons and uncommons, which is going to be a super exciting time. So yeah, we're super excited to play with those cards. Definitely going to be trying to run a stream tonight. Thursday night, the 5th of May. So stay tuned for that. And of course, we will be streaming this live on the May 11th, Wednesday. So looking really forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. All right. First off, I got Shavka. Summon, draw Fire Sigil from your deck. This is part of a 5-part cycle, which is basically just 2-cost cards that draw a sigil in a similar vein to like a favor. I have made comparisons already between set 1 and Unleashed, and I would say that Unleashed and set 1 still have a lot of like those general similarities. There's a lot of like the same sort of design space that's being treaded upon. In this case, instead of units or spells that have their particular favor, we're getting relics that have a pay 6 ability that does something a little bit interesting. For Hour of Shavka, we get the Etched Totemites, 1-cost 0/1s that say at the start of your turn, you get to sacrifice them to get +1 power this turn. So you have to sacrifice them, which means that they're just a +3 power boost, assuming that you can hold on to them and they don't get swept by some sort of effect like a harsh roll. Overall, I'm not terribly impressed with this card. It is nice because it fixes power, and power fixing is important, but the pay 6 ability is pretty weak. Not only are you paying 6 to try to get some units that may eventually be useful later, but if those units die, then that plan also dies on the vine, and you didn't really get anything out of Hour of Shavka apart from a free fire sigil, which admittedly everybody needs free fire sigils, but unless you're a mono fire deck that just like has the space and time to draw fire sigils by paying a 2-cost relic, I don't know that this one's actually going to see a lot of play. So regardless, it's an interesting option, and I think there are plenty of other choices. Sign of the Reborn is our promo card. We talked about that one in our previous video. Darkheart Acolyte is a real wild design. All right, 3-cost 1/4, taunt. So gets to attack and force blocks pretty consistently, and because of its high defense, actually gets to do this potentially more than once. Has a frenzy ability, which does not gel with its taunt ability. Those two do not interact with each other in any way. But the frenzy ability is create and draw a 5/5 dragon with flying. So you get a 1/4 that's a decent blocker, can attack to tie up different enemies, and every time that you play a spell that triggers Frenzy, you get a full 5/5 dragon for 6, which is pretty crazy. I would say that basically, if you want to weigh out your opponent in sheer numbers, this is definitely the card to do it with. The dragons, I believe, are Skycrag. I don't remember for sure if the 5/5 dragon is a Skycrag or a neutral dragon, but in either case, it is just like a nasty, scary 5/5 flyer, costs a lot to play, but this really opens up the option for red to play late into the game and do a lot of like card advantage based stuff simply by pinging the opponent multiple times with different effects. And if that's the case, then free dragons is pretty neat. Darkheart Acolyte is a card that doesn't seem to have anything going like in terms of like gelling with itself. The taunt and the frenzy, as I said, are just like two fairly separate abilities, but it does so many things that I think it's going to be a pretty useful uncommon for both the draft environment and for limited and potentially even Throne. It really depends on if you can do anything with those dragons, like make them cheaper or something along those lines. I would say that this is a pretty amazing expedition card, which could end up like ruling the format in some aspects. We'll see how well it goes. Homesick Yeti, we did discuss this one. It's pretty fun. Love that spoiler. Red is cute and Homesick Yeti is cute, and I am a fan of the cute Yetis. The Yetis are still just a strong design for Eternal. Party Crasher, charge, taunt, summon, you may exhaust an enemy unit. This is elegant design. This does a lot of really cool things. So the summon exhaust an enemy unit is not an effect that you normally want to see on a 5-drop. Charge and taunt is something that you don't really want to see on a 3/2 necessarily for 5, but combine the two and you basically get a card that can play, exhaust something that is a problem, and then basically pick its target for taunt, which could be really effective under the right circumstances. I still think this card might need a little bit more to get across the like top end. At the moment, it's just a 5-cost removal card in common because it's pretty likely to just hit the target that it wants to hit and trade with it, but trading with it means that you're trading with, what, a 3 health unit? That's not quite as good as you might expect. Overall, I do really like the combination of the exhaust and the taunt. I think that sort of selectivity in taunt is really, really interesting. And if you can actually get this card to boost up and do some other like constant recursion shenanigans, it gets pretty fun pretty fast. All right, Hour Grodov. Draw a Time Sigil. You can pay 6 and sacrifice it to give your units +1/+1. Another pretty minor benefit, but this one actually provides immediate board advantage, so I would say it's a lot stronger. This is definitely a, like, Talir's favorite that you're pretty happy to put into your deck, because A, it gives you relics for time, which time just has a lot of relic synergies already, and B, the pay 6 ability is actually pretty useful in certain circumstances. You can just use it to survive certain upcoming cards, you can use it to boost your damage, you can use it to improve your trades. This is just something where odds are pretty good you're cracking this and getting a good benefit out of it, unlike the Aroshavka. I think this is a pretty decent card, and overall, like, mana fixing is really good in time as well, so doesn't seem bad. Seems like a very, very solid limited option, and should be very good in Expedition as well. Insect Swarm, Flying Ambush Unleash. I don't think I like Ambush Unleash together. It is really funny. Basically, this basically just says that when your opponent attacks, you can then play an Insect Swarm, play an Insect Swarm, play an Insect Swarm. The problem is that you're probably doing it at that pace due to the way that Eternal Animations play, and I think that over repeated games, that gets really obnoxious really fast, especially when it's in the middle of your attack phase. If this is happening at end of turn, it's pretty funny, and it's pretty good, and it's probably something that most people are going to be fine with, but I feel like there's something a little bit different about this in response to one of your units where you're like, oh, you have 6 power, huh? And you're playing an insect, and then you're going to play another insect and another insect. Just being able to see that coming down the line kind of ruins the surprise value and just the general game feel of Ambush. That's my only note on the card. I do think it's pretty good. I like Ambush flying. I think that this is like, you know, the general Humbug thing is quite nice. It's kind of sad that it can't be called Humbug Swarm because Humbugs exist, and, you know, but there's already a card called Humbug Swarm, so Humbug Surprise? I do wish it was Humbug themed, but it's fine that it's insects. It's okay. You can do that. All right, next up. Maniacal Reveler we have already reviewed. It is pretty interesting take on the Soul Stealer. Some pretty cool stuff going on. Questioning Devotee. Okay, this is another cycle. We're actually seeing a lot of really interesting cycles in this draft. So, Questioning Devotee is one of a cycle of transforming cards. Notably, they are normal cards that transform into what I'm going to assume are heroes. It doesn't say specifically, but you can see from the text box and the general style here that it is in fact some sort of hero that's transforming off of it. So, Questioning Devotee, 1/1 with Summon, put another unit into its owner's hand. That's a decent baseline. Obviously, it's not a very well-statted unit, but being able to teleport on top of something is typically okay. And I believe the last card that this was on was a 5-cost 3/3. So 4-cost 1/1, a little bit of upside, a lot of downside. The ultimate is that when Questioning Devotee deals damage and survives, transform her into Mother Zora. Mother Zora is a deadly 3/3 that gives your other units +1/+1 and deadly on your turn. The deadly on your turn is, you know, like a pretty reasonable effect that seems to be getting repeated in time a lot. It's neither here nor there. It definitely allows a lot of time smaller stuff to trade up in a way that typically doesn't happen. But the Xenon Obelisk style effect on Mother Zora is quite strong. I don't know if that is actually... The wording could indicate that the +1/+1 is only on your turn. I think that's correct. Yeah, but either way, this is a bonus that you're really, really happy to have on the attack, and the cost to get it is somewhat high, but it makes for a very interesting limited shenanigans and allows you to potentially operate with some frenzy cards that might perhaps deal damage by playing, say, an Ice Bow or something along those lines. I don't know if Ice Bow is going to be in the set or if it's going to be in the draft, but something like that could get you a pretty big unit with a pretty big bonus and kind of make your limited day. Expedition-wise, I think this is a few too many hoops to jump through, but that teleport does add a little bit of spice to that maneuver. Our Kodash. Okay. Third in the cycle, draw a Justice Sigil, pay 6 and sacrifice to gain 3 armor, and give a unit +3/+3 this turn. The armor's pretty minor, but considering that Furious Magniventress is probably still going to be in the set and expedition, this seems very reasonable in that respect. Like, you're basically just giving your Furious Magniventress a +6/+6 on attack, which, yeah, it's pretty strong. In other situations, I don't know, this card is, like, it's a minor benefit and an okay one, but paying 6 is definitely a pretty high price to pay for it. I still think the Justice Sigil's pretty worth it, and the relics are, you know, just generally nice to have. If your deck cares about having a lot of relics, you're going to play any of the hours, but the question of whether or not the pay 6 ability is worth it is a little bit more up in the air than it was for the 7-cost cards that you played off of hybrid stuff. In these situations, you're getting pretty minor benefits for what is probably just an end-of-game sack to get some kind of minor option. Scorful Elite. This one's a sleeper, in my opinion. 2 cost 0/4, or I don't know, maybe everyone thinks this card is good. I think this card is maybe broken. Okay, so 0/4 Aegis. When the enemy player plays a unit, it gets -4 strength until the start of their next turn. So I've been playing with an Argenport deck recently, and there is a card right now that kills an enemy unit, but steals it if its power is less than 1. So Scornful Elite is right away a setup for a pretty scary Argenport deck that can just steal any unit it likes, and then basically just give it some cool bonuses afterwards. This is probably going to go into the brew that we release if we ever have time to record it. So yeah, we'll be talking about this a little bit more in depth if we talk about it in Argenport. But like, yeah, I would say that is a pretty reasonable reason to like this card. It also sets up better attacks for any Warcry units, anything that you are basically wanting to attack into defending units. It's not quite the same as the one that exhausts enemy units, but it pops all Aegises, so that's a pretty significant effect as well. And it basically makes it so that these units can't block as effectively, won't trade as well, and just generally have a lot more issues on block. All of that's pretty bad. On top of that, this card is a 2 cost 0/4 Aegis, which means that when it comes down, it's pretty likely to be able to block. It's not going to be something that you can kill very easily. You have to spend a lot of effort to actually get rid of the Aegis. And finally, the card just really, really holds weapons well. And that is something that seems like it isn't a part of its design, but ends up being like really, really important if you are trying to just jam some really nasty, aggressive stuff with weapons and spells and tricks. Because if you can actually give this card like a little bit of extra damage and some flying, a little bit of extra health, it's already got Aegis, it's a 2 cost 0/4. There was a 1 cost 0/3, I think, in red early in set 1's design, and that card ended up being like kind of outrageous because it got extra bonuses off of weapons being played on it. This is a 2 cost that's very sticky and really responds well to having weapons played on it, and I think that there's potential for that to be something basically very nasty in a throne deck, and also extremely nasty in an expedition deck depending on the weapon quality. Regardless, I think this card just does a lot of legwork for a wall. There's a lot of different things that this card does, and all of them are from the relative safety of 4 health and an Aegis. So while Taunt and other stuff like that might make it a little bit more relevant, I also think that like Scornful Elite is specifically an anti-taunt card, and it does that job really well. I don't know. I think this one might be a little too pushed. We'll see. Yeah, it's very rare to say that a 0 attack card is too pushed, but in this case, like, this one looks good. This one looks real good. We'll see how it goes. Tinker Unionist. Taunt and Warcry, and Unleash if you have a relic. A lot of good things going on here. Taunt and Warcry together. Good combination. Another sort of equivalent option for like your Crown Watch Paladin, where basically instead of it being like a more survivable unit with Warcry, it is a more aggressive unit with Warcry that's guaranteed to trade with your stuff. However, if you have a relic, which you can have if you're playing Hour of Kodash, for example, you then also get Unleash, so you can play multiple copies of these ridiculous nonsense Warcry units. The ability to play 2 or 3 or even 4 of these cards does significantly increase the strength of them in the late game. In addition, since they're in Warcry decks, they're pretty likely to be Warcrying themselves, and thus getting even bigger and more nasty. I would say your basic, standard, just cheapo, common, uncommon Warcry build, the classic like Rakano setup that is just gonna basically win you up to gold pretty frequently, will probably be running a lot of this card in Expedition. This seems like something that's gonna be kind of sick in that respect. Also, it's Tinker, which, you know, nice to have another cool Tinker with some very good art, I'd say. All right. Forensic Analyst. Flying, when an attachment goes to your Void, transform Forensic Analyst into Chief Investigator West. When Chief Investigator West attacks, and they are a 4/4 flyer, gain an armor, play a Valkyrie with flying. Okay, so here's the problem with this card. Blitzstone. Turn 2, Blitzstone on Enthrone, I think. I'm pretty... I would hope that Blitzstone is not an Expedition for this format. Maybe it will be. But turn 2, Blitzstone, kill a small unit. Turn 3, play a Forensic Analyst. It transforms into Chief Investigator West. I don't know if it gets the bonus before or after it transforms, but either way, you're then attacking with a 4/4 flyer that also plays another flyer and gives you an armor. Pretty brutal. Pretty nuts. Yeah, this card has a lot of potential to be a game changer in Throne metas. I think there's some pretty interesting decks that can play around with this, and the ability to just give it charge and then go straight out the gate with it seems pretty good. I would say that, like, in an Expedition or other format, like a limited format, this is still a pretty good card. Flying is pretty decent. Attachments are sometimes pretty easy to sacrifice. There's a lot of attachments that you have to get specifically to activate Forensic Analyst, but if you manage it, then yeah, your Chief Investigator is going to do some pretty awesome stuff. So seems pretty cool. Overall, I would say this card's probably going to be one of the stronger of the transform cycle. It's wildly good, and it's good in a number of different formats. So yeah, definitely look to see a lot of that in the future. Core Repairman. 2/3 ultimate, pay 3 to play a 1/1 Valkyrie with flying and Warcry. Pretty sure that's Loyal Watchwing, yeah? Yeah, Loyal Watchwing. So yeah, that is pretty straightforward stuff. This card is just like kind of a decent Expedition option. The pay 3 is like, it's not amazing, but it is a free unit on top of the unit that you're already playing. The unit you're already playing is unfortunately a 4-cost 2/3, which even in limited is just kind of meh. I do think that Flying and Warcry together do work really well, and that Loyal Watchwing is a pretty powerful card, but honestly I might prefer to just play Loyal Watchwing in the deck, which is probably a bit of a strike against this basic common. Sticky Fingers. Aegis, once per turn, pay 4 to deal 1 damage to the enemy player. This would be absolute garbage if it weren't for Frenzy. Obviously, it is a Frenzy trigger, so this is definitely something that you can play in Expedition and Draft to trigger your Frenzies. It is a lot to pay for to trigger a Frenzy, and it is once per turn, so if it were not once per turn, I would be pretty tentatively interested in this card. But it is, and that is just like, okay. 1/1 Aegis, not too bad. You can definitely put weapons on that, maybe. If there are good weapons, and if there are good weapons, I don't know, you might be in green, because green's got some wild nonsense. Still, being able to trigger repeated, constant Frenzy effects is going to be very, very useful for many, many reasons, some of which we'll be seeing in these other cards. Flash Flood. Yeah, we did talk about this one. It's a super fun design. I think it's a very good implementation of Unleash. Hour of Linray. Draw a primal card sigil from your deck, pay 6 to draw 2 cards and discard. Okay, that's pretty reasonable. I think if you're looking for like a soak type setup where it's like, it's the end of the game, you gotta do something, and you don't have any cards, so you might as well just pay 6. Drawing cards and then taking your pick of them is definitely not a bad one. This definitely seems like something that supports a lot of good control aspects, puts relics into your setup, and also draws you primal sigils. There's nothing wrong with any of the hours, specifically because a lot of cards just care about having relics or care about relics in some way. So like any card that actually like draws on that effect is just going to be pretty happy, even if the card is just a normal 2-cost draw a primal sigil. In this case, the upside is fairly strong, a lot stronger than the red one, and I'd say up there with the yellow one? Oh, what was the one that I was really excited about? The yellow one, +1/+1. I'd say this might even be the better one of the two. Green Stretch Griffin. Flying and Unleash, 3 cost 2/2. So, you know, like 3 cost 2/2 flyer, that's a pretty good limited card. It's a pretty okay limited card, actually. I think you can get like Aegis on that in most situations. But then it also pay 6 for 2/2s. That's okay. Pay 9 for 3/2s. That's looking a lot better in the limited format, but at that point in Expedition, you're probably looking for other things. I don't think this card sees much play beyond a limited format. Like Draft, it's definitely an okay pick, probably like a BB+. But the main question is, like, can you Warcry it? Can you buff it up? Can you do all the fun things that make it really fun to unleash with? If you can actually get, like, really good buffs on this quickly, then it becomes more Expedition or Throne viable. Maybe a green Huru Warcry deck could see a lot of Green Stretch Griffin, but considering it doesn't have any sort of like survivability aspect to it, I'm not sure. Still, it just lots of free copies, and then you can also like maybe like play Feln Dark Return type stuff. There's some potential. Flying is just a good skill to have on an Unleash card. Mindbroken Cobbler. Okay, some of these designs go pretty hard. This is a 4/3 with Aegis, which, crazy nonsense. 4/3 with Overwhelm and Aegis. 4/3. So yeah, if you have a unit in your Void, which is admittedly not the most easy thing to do, then you get a 4/3 Overwhelm Aegis, which is an absolutely bonkers card to be playing at Uncommon. I would say this card's going to be pretty significantly strong. Obviously, we're going to need some things that kill units with Aegis, because, boy, there's a bit of that going around. Fortunately, there is a really simple available option, and that is Taunt. But I would say that, like, based on the Taunt cards I have seen so far, I'm a little worried about some of these Aegis cards. There's some pretty nasty ones, and if they get decent buffs, they just become immune to Taunt, which is significantly more scary. So yeah, we'll see exactly how well that goes. Mindbroken Cobbler seems really, really on point, and, like, just generally very efficient for a primal card. This is an aggressive, nasty, overwhelmed creature with decent stats. It's already got more stats than your standard 3 cost 3/3, and it has overwhelm, and it has the possibility of getting an Aegis. I mean, you're just going to pick a ton of these cards in Draft, and you're going to feel pretty happy about them in Expedition, and possibly even Throne. It's quite efficient. Crinkle Boys. 2/2 Unleash, Summon, Play a Snowball. This one's a lot more exciting than the Green Stretch Griffin, I think, because it is a repeated method to trigger frenzies, and also an extremely fun removal card, and also is a cute Yeti, which, you know, that usually never hurts the card's popularity. I think you're going to see a lot of the Crinkle Boys out there. Reducing the cost of this card, it makes it into just a constant snowball machine, which is very, very fun, and increasing the strength of it just gives you, you know, some Jotun hurlers that play a bunch of snowballs, which is certainly fine. Crinkle Boys definitely add a number of snowballs to the format that makes, like, just snowball-focused decks a lot more viable, which I guess they already were becoming a lot more viable because of Frenzy, so yeah, we'll see how well this goes. It's certainly not, like, super efficient for its own right, but like most Unleash cards, there is a lot of potential for this to fly off the handle, and I think it's one of the more likely to do so due to its interactions with Frenzy and its interactions with spell-based, damage-based, and other types of strategies. Jotun Runt. 2/2, when it attacks with 2 other units, transform him into General Horgo. Really cute art on this one, actually. It's a little bullied guy who then becomes a general. He grows up. He might grow up very, very early if you're playing in him some sort of charge deck. So General Horgo is an Aegis 5/5 with whenever one or more of your units hits the enemy player, create and draw a random spell. Random spells are a favorite of mine. I really like that mechanic. I really enjoyed it on, I think, Flame Breather was one of the last ones, 5/3 that attacks and gets that bonus. General Horgo seems like it's going to end a game pretty fast. Like, if you actually get this down and you're attacking with another unit, like, probably going to get to some pretty ridiculous shenanigans. This works really well with some of the charge fire taunts, so I think Skycrag spell-based decks might see a decent amount of play combined with Jotun Runt. You basically just play a Jotun Runt, and then you attack in with a taunt unit to clear the Jotun Runt into becoming a General Horgo. And then attacking in for 5. So yeah, could be pretty sick. Random spells are not, like, insanely valuable all the time, but they are pretty consistent card advantage, and they're typically better than, like, just getting a random card, I would say. Yeah, a lot of potential here. definitely a really, really cool one. Through the Unknown. Everybody gets a Frenzy Enabler. This is a Shadow Dark Return. Instead of giving +1/+1, it triggers Frenzy. Pretty basic. The fact that you have to pick a Shadow unit to get that Frenzy trigger is a little bit sad. I think that does limit some of the options a bit. Basically, you know, Shadow units are generally built with some of that recursion in mind, and it's often better to splash your Shadow card to Dark Return something that's going to get like a better benefit out of it. I don't know. Regardless, this is okay. It's a decent Frenzy trigger. It's probably going to be your most common Frenzy trigger in both Expedition and in Draft, and if Frenzy decks are popular in Throne, you're going to see it there too. I think it's just a little bit of a workhorse. So, does all the things you want it to do. It's also another one of those one-drop draw a unit from your voids, which there aren't too many of those out around. At this point, I think we're up to maybe 12, so you can get into some pretty crazy recursion stuff now. Forgotten Youth, Summon Scout. Haven't seen Scout on a card in a while. Curious to see if we'll see more. So yeah, Scout is, if you've missed it, look at the top card of your deck, you can put it on the bottom. So, Frenzy. This one is interesting. I really like the art on this one. Very, very cool. Summon Scout, Frenzy, you gain 1 health. After the 3rd time, transform Forgotten Youth into Alicia Unafraid. Alicia Unafraid is a 1/4, but has unblockable and another Frenzy effect, 3 strength, and lifesteal this turn. So, this is a tricky one. 0/3 is still not that healthy. It's definitely not 0/4 Aegis, which is becoming my new baseline. Hello, that's just crazy nonsense. You have to trigger Frenzy 3 times to get a 1/4 unblockable, which is also not that good. Like, a 2-cost 1/4 unblockable is a very playable card. It's just not necessarily a game winner. If it gets lifesteal and +3 strength, that's pretty stabilizing. So 4th Frenzy trigger, starting to look like you got a real unit there. 5th or 6th Frenzy trigger, you're starting to attack in for like 10, 12 in a turn. That's 6 Frenzy triggers though, which is, if you got 6 Frenzy triggers, you're probably doing something else right, and you might already be in a situation to win the game with other cards. I think the amount of Frenzy triggers this card asks for is quite a bit much. On the other hand, the card does have Scout. It's a 2-cost, it blocks some aggro cards. It gives you health when you Frenzy, which is, you know, mildly stabilizing in addition to it being a body on the board. So it's got some good counter aggro. I mean, it is definitely accruing value over time. The thing that it's not doing, I think, is winning you the game. I think it has the potential to win you the game if you can trigger a lot of different frenzies in a row, but mostly what it's doing is balancing out those frenzies with a little life gain, and that is maybe not so much. Alright, that's my Discord beeping, and I don't know why I've shut off all the notifications. It shouldn't do that. Ah! Alright, anyways. Hour of Makar. Summon, draw a Shadow Sigil from your deck, pay 6, sacrifice it to give a unit with +3 strength and taunt this turn. That's a good benefit. Yeah, I'd say this one is basically, it's a removal card on top of your summon. You do have to give it to a unit that is going to survive having taunt, but yeah, this is pretty likely to actually give you some sort of extra benefit that you're pretty happy with. So, probably 3rd in ranking on the 5. Panic Ensues. I might actually rate it a little higher than the time one. Panic Ensues. Unleash, give an enemy unit -1/-1. Interesting take on Plague. I can't say Plague. Okay, so yeah, this is a -1/-1, but you can scale it up. I think the flexibility of this card does make it a little more worth it. Plague is not a card that you would really want to put into a deck, but Panic Ensues is one where, you know, like this card does sweep, and then it sweeps better later, and then it sweeps even better later, and you don't really care how much power you're spending as long as you're sweeping selectively at the exact health total that you want to kill. At that point, maybe this card becomes a little more usable. Still think it's probably Expedition only, though. Street Gang. Unleash. Summon the enemy player discards the top 3 cards of their deck. Deal 2 damage to them for each spell discarded this way. So it's a unreliable Frenzy trigger, but you know, not terribly unreliable. I think it's got a reasonable chance of hitting, and then, you know, you can pay more to have it hit more often. There's a lot of things going on with this card, but the fact that it is like a mill option I think you have to reduce the cost of it for it to be super worth it, and since it has no other skills or stats, and the 2 damage is kind of hard to get, I'm not sure about it. It might be interesting as like a market card or like a card against a heavy control meta where spell-based decks become very common, but like milling is not amazing. Direct damage is good, but not in such an unreliable format and not on a 4-cost 2/2. So, I don't know. I mean, in situations where you deal 6, that's pretty nice. In situations where you deal 2, that's pretty meh. In situations where you'll deal 0, which is, I think, probably the most common scenario since you're playing, what, 20 units and 25 power in a game? Yeah, like, that's going to be, like, not an amazing option. So, we'll see. Breath of Miviox we have just covered. Praxis Adept we have also covered. It's a pretty neat Adept, and it's part of an Adept cycle, which is the last of the cards we shall be reviewing today. Rakan Adept. When you play a spell or weapon directly on Rakan Adept, it gets Taunt this turn. Pretty simple and pretty solid. So all of the Adepts are like champions, but a little bit more flexible. Like basically all of them just do a thing, and that thing is vaguely in their colors. I would say more than vaguely in their colors. It's very specifically in their colors, but some of the things that they do are very good. Some of the things that they do are very mediocre, and some of them are just kind of bad. Rakan Adept is one of the ones that's on the very good side. This is something where you basically just get to play slow tricks, I guess would be how I would describe it. So anything where you're like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna give this thing +3/+3. Now you have to block it. That's a pretty big deal because there are a couple of cards that can be played at slow speed that are fairly nasty, but don't really work because they aren't tricks. I think the one that probably is most interesting to me is like in Taunt with Victor's Cry. It's a 4-cost. I believe it's fast at first, but it has Revenge, so you can play it off the top of your deck. And when that happens, you don't get the option of saying, hey, now your opponent has to block it. Whereas with Rakan Adept, you do. So finding those types of interactions could maybe make the card a little more worth it in Throne. Something like that. But on the other hand, is a 4/4 for 6. Pretty likely to get murdered very, very quickly. And what it is doing is giving you general value and sort of just, more aggressive strategy. It isn't giving you the reach that you want to win the game, and that's usually what you're looking for at 6 in Rakano. So that's kind of a strike against it. Still, in Expedition, in limited formats, this is something where you're going to be pretty happy to see it, pretty happy to play it. Never like extremely excited to see it or play it, but in both circumstances it might make the cut, and it's fairly likely to, I would say, in limited in particular. Skycrag Adept, we've talked about this one. Super cool, excellent frenzy benefits, and seems great for damage in general. Stonescar Adept, I feel like we might have talked about this one as well. I think this was one of the first Frenzy cards shown off. It's definitely a good use of Frenzy, Overwhelm, Warcry, and the +1/+1 bonuses, so you just get to attack with a steadily growing Warcry card. The thing about Warcry cards is that they rarely grow themselves, and this is one of the few examples where that isn't true, and it's in Stonescar, which is normally about, like, risky, aggressive decks that don't like play quite as slowly. This is a good implementation of a more interesting version of that where you can actually like just get bigger units while also getting bigger units and just have your cake and eat it too. One of the stronger Adepts, especially since it's costed at 2 and it's efficient for its stat line. Combre Adept, we heard you like power, so we put some power in your power. +1 maximum power, and you get a Time Sigil or Justice Sigil. It fixes, except you already have to have both colors, so fixing isn't a particularly big issue. But it also gives you +1. That's all right. Definitely something that you're going to be playing, because maximum power just gets you to places. Combre Adept isn't like, breaking any banks. It is a 1 health unit. It has 2 strength for reasons, so it can trade, and it also just replaces itself with a Time Sigil, which, yeah, I mean, that's basically everything you want. It's a not quite a secret pages, but it is more valuable than a secret pages in most circumstances because it puts something on the board, it still ramps you, and it gives you extra power on top of that. So lots of consistency, lots of ability to get to like the 5s and 6s and 7s. I can see this card even being played in Throne for the combination of those two abilities, although being vulnerable to snowballs is a hard thing to be right now, especially with the prevalence of a new Unleash card, I hear, that exists at 3. So yeah, there's some obvious counterplay to Cambrai Adept, but the risk may be worth it. Elysian Adept, when you draw an additional card, it gets +1/+1. That's a generally effective... I don't think we've seen an Elysian card that's had this at this cheap. There is a stealth card that does it. I think it's Yuffie, and Yuffie has 3 health, which is also a big bonus. Once per turn, you can pay 4 to make each player draw a card. So yeah, reasonable thing to play on 7, because you get like a 2/2 that then grows even further. Overall, this card is pretty weak early, pretty weak late, and very, very strong in a limited format, because you're fairly likely to actually get a lot of additional cards and just like actually make this thing into a larger, scarier threat. Still, this is, I think all of the Adepts play best in limited formats and are not designed so much for Throne. They're not really comparing to the Champions of Chaos or champions of the champions of their particular setups. All right, Xenon Adept. 7 cost, +1 strength for each of your units. Summon, draw a unit from your void, give it +1/+1. The summon ability is really, really good. The +1 ability is reasonable, especially on an unblockable unit. The two of them together, I think, form a complete puzzle, but not one that's terribly exciting for Throne. In Expedition, maybe. In Limited, absolutely. You certainly want all of these things. Card advantage, additional bonuses to recursive advantage, and you get the extra benefit of being able to attack with this, deal some damage, and be okay. 7 is a hard cost to pay in Limited, but, you know, like you might be playing Cambrai Xenon, and then you'll have a Cambrai Adept to help out with that. So, you know, you never know. Huru Adept. Aegis, when it attacks, it gets +1/+1 this turn for each of its battle skills. This is straight up probably going to be decently strong. Plays pretty well with a lot of the other unseen Huru stuff. So if you wanted to like go back to an unseen Huru battle skills deck, you might actually slot this into a Throne card. I mean, it's got Aegis, and it also gets a huge bonus for every skill it gets. So play it with that 2-cost 2/2 that gives a random battle skill, and you've already got something that attacks as a 4/4. And it's got Aegis. So I don't know. I think there's definitely a lot of work to get this going, but it's reasonable, and certainly something that you're going to be happy to play in smaller formats. I would say this is Expedition capable, but maybe not fit for Throne. Depends really on how good your unseen deck is. Argenport Adept. This is a really interesting take on the a set 1 card, actually. 4 cost 2/2 that gives an enemy unit -2/-2 with Entomb. For the cost of 1 green influence, you can also give it lifesteal and taunt, meaning that it attacks, forces blocks, and then those blocks are probably pretty unfavorable for your opponent. In addition, the card is also gaining you life, which is pretty sick. Chances are this card can trade 2 for 1 in a limited format, in a draft format. You have to kind of give it a decent boost across, but like also this is a place where you're using rapid shots, you're using lots of like shadow cards that boost your attack, so you can potentially get some really, really interesting trades here. And the -2/-2 shuts down a lot of cards that would come back from the void or would otherwise be pretty threatening. Good selective removal for you, reasonable, and probably a worthy pick in any sort of limited format. Last Adept is Feln Adept. 0/4, flying with Frenzy, +2 strength this turn. When it hits the enemy player, draw one of the top 3 cards of your deck, put the rest on the bottom. So, a little bit of work needs to be done for this card to even attack, but it is a 0/4 flyer that's attacking typically as a 2/4 flyer, and all you have to do is play a snowball on your opponent. Play a snowball, attack for 2, draw a card selectively from your deck, not too selectively, but still from the top 3 cards, which is decent selection. And every time that you repeat that, you're effectively trading a snowball for additional damage and more card selection, which, yeah, that's a pretty good setup. I would say that Feln Adept is one of the stronger picks for any sort of limited setup. If you're in draft, this is a card that you're going to feel pretty excited to build around. This is something where you just build a lot of snowballs, you build a lot of spell damage, you maybe splash in some red, and then you just go nuts on all the card advantage that you're going to be getting from this fairly aggressive and fairly healthy flyer. Between all of that, you get pretty good benefits, so it's pretty good stuff. Okay, that is all of the cards that are currently in the draft preview. We still have some spoilers to break down. Those will be coming, but this video is already at 40 minutes, so we're going to call it. Thank you so much for watching. We will be doing some streaming tonight, I really hope, and we'll see you then. Thanks again, and see you next time with more Eternal spoiler breakdowns and hopefully some brews soon too. It's exciting to get back into Eternal, and I'm very, very excited to be doing it. Bye all.